Which is this the first one you've done live stream, or have you
I
done it
I
before?
did one last month, and it worked out pretty well. So, and I didn't bungle it up too much. So,
With
all right.
whom?
All right, Paul, it's great to have you here. Hello, audience. This is Rich Davini, and I'm here today with Paul Zach. Paul is a pioneer in the field of neuroeconomics, focused on uncovering how the hormone oxytocin produces trust. Paul is the founding director of the Center for Neuroeconomic Studies and professor of economics, psychology, and management at Claremont Graduate University. He has degrees in mathematics and economics from San Diego State University, a PhD in economics from the University of Pennsylvania, and a postdoctoral training in neuroimaging from Harvard. And his research on oxytocin and relationships has earned him the nickname Dr. Love. And Paul and I met a little while ago, became fast friends, I think, in just a 40-minute conversation. But I've been so excited to talk to you, Paul. And a lot of what I talk about nowadays certainly is trust, but my former profession, a lot of trust involved. So we're going to get into trust. We're going to get into oxytocin. But if I could just have you talk and explain to us and the audience what exactly is neuroeconomics. What is that?
So I know, Rich, that you have never made a bad decision in your life, but your brother-in-law, who was buying investment real estate in 2007, when everyone knew it was a real estate bubble, what's the deal with that? So neuroeconomics measures reactivity while people make decisions to understand where decisions come from, how to improve decisions. And I think it's a very humble field. I think when you're on my front lines in the laboratory, your front lines, you see people who are able to switch left or right, and you go, "Gosh, that's really interesting." So I think to understand behavioral diversity, neural diversity, decision making is the kind of crux for that. So once they
Yeah.
understand where decisions come from, individual or group decisions, I think we have great insight into human nature and human behavior.
Yeah, wow, that's fascinating. I mean, there's enough just to dive into decision making there, and we will in a second because I really want to kind of get into oxytocin, the molecule you've spent so much time studying. And I want to actually ask you, maybe not the first question, but how that relates to decision making. But before we get into kind of what oxytocin does and all of the nuances of it, can you explain to us the molecule and how you came about it and what oxytocin is and how it kind of relates to trust?
Great. It's easy to study bad behavior in the lab. I do that. I can raise your heart rate, right? It's easy, right? So fear responses are easy to generate because they're survival instincts. But studying positive human behaviors, teamwork, high performance, good decision making is actually kind of hard to do. And so people had just not studied it. And I'm a very, very lazy person, Rich. So I just wanted to take, virgin territory in my research and go, well, no one's doing this. Maybe I can figure that out. So
Yeah.
as we started looking at where trust comes from, which is embedded in every aspect of our lives, right? You trusted that I would show up for this live stream. We get in an airplane. I mean, everything we do has some degree of trust embedded in it
Yeah.
because we're social creatures. We're embedded in communities. From the animal literature, we knew a lot about this neurochemical oxytocin that seemed to signal safety or familiarity, but there wasn't a way to really measure this effectively in humans. So it's a very fragile molecule. It's ancient in origin, goes back at least 400 million years to a version in fish. But it seems to be a key signaling molecule for things are cool,
Yeah.
roughly speaking. So we developed a protocol to measure this acute production of oxytocin in humans, and also developed a way to safely shoot synthetic oxytocin into the human brain, which I've done safely about 700 times to show the causal effects. And what we found is that it seems to be a key signaling molecule that says this person in front of me, maybe friend, maybe stranger, is safe. This person is someone I want to interact with. And motivates social interaction. And it does it in a couple interesting ways. It reduces physiologic stress. So now I get a somatic feedback.
Hmm.
I can always articulate this is unconscious, way deep in the brainstem, evolutionary old stuff. Like, oh yeah, Rich seems cool. Like you said, we're friends. And we had a great conversation a couple of weeks ago, and we just kind of clicked. Why is that, right? So something in our brain says, Rich, fine. And then your producer, Nick, very sketchy guy. I can just tell you from talking to him for 2 minutes. Right. So we can't live in communities. We can't be around people. We can't do extraordinary things like you've done in your career without having that ticker in your brain that at least, imperfectly says safe, not safe, trustworthy, not trustworthy.
Yeah.
So it reduces physiologic stress. And then lastly, increases our ability to share emotions with others. So we think about how to work effectively as a high performance team. One of that is training cognition, right? You do this, I go that. We're gonna breach a room. You're going left, I'm going right. We know how to do those things cognitively, but there's also this level of emotional connection
Yeah.
in which I can have this innate sense that this guy is now a weak link, right? He needs my help, or I got to cover him, or this person has some great leadership skills, or right now, take point, you are on task. And somehow we know that. So oxytocin accentuates our ability to absorb those emotions and allows us to be much more effective social creatures.
Yeah. And so I want to talk about specific things that produce oxytocin, and certainly get into oxytocin and stress, because that's a huge factor of some of certainly the work I've done. Before I do, though, oxytocin, as I understand it, is a hormone, not a neurotransmitter. Or am I incorrect about it? Is that in fact a transmitter, or is it what is oxytocin? Is it a neurotransmitter hormone? Yeah.
All those things.
Okay.
Dopamine, neurotransmitter hormone. Serotonin, neurotransmitter, also works. So hormone means it binds to organs in the peripheral nervous system. A neurotransmitter, a neuromodulator, means it's active in the brain. So oxytocin is made in the brainstem. It's a really weird neurochemical system, evolutionarily old. On stimulus, and we can talk about what causes your brain to release this, it's released in the brain, but also in the bloodstream.
Okay.
So you have this kind of interesting feedback loop. So prior to the work I started doing in the early 2000s, it was just known to be associated with birth and breastfeeding. It's kind of mammalian reproductive behaviors, care for offspring. So one of my colleagues who's OBGYN, when I first started getting interested in oxytocin, said, oh, it can't be very important. It's just for women. And then we have this interesting anomaly. Why do men's brains make oxytocin? Under what circumstances? What might it be doing? So evolution is very stingy. And evolution is a conservative. It does not want to produce some energy producing neurochemicals it doesn't need. So it reuses them. So in the brain, the oxytocin is called a neuromodulator. So it basically modulates the activity of larger circuits and other neurochemicals. So we're really talking about oxytocin in the brain as a neurochemical. Even though it has those, for example, relaxing effects in the peripheral nervous system, the behavioral effects come from the brain. Again, how do we know that? I can shoot it up your nose into your brain, and I can see these effects occur. Where if I give it to you peripherally, say with an IV, I don't see those behavioral effects. I'm sorry, that was too much of an explanation.
No, I love it. Yeah.
What we're talking about here is now interaction. So you say, what promotes or inhibits its release? And that's where things get really interesting, particularly for the work you've done in your book. Because your brain's so lazy, takes 20% roughly of your calories to run this little 3-pound organ in your head, super high overhead. The brain just wants to kind of idle most of the time. So you need a little bit of stress. You need a reason for the brain to go, oh, I need to draw on my social resources so that I'm going to release oxytocin and be an effective team member. So like most things in biology, there's sort of inverted U curve. Moderate amount of stress, good, right? That's again for the work you've done. You're on. You are focused. Can I use a bad word or no?
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Shit's going down, right?
Yeah.
Like we got to be on, right? So I'm keyed in, right? I have a reason to kick in with the rest of my team. Now, if I push that really far beyond that inverted U, where now I am so frozen with fear, I can't move. I'm in survival mode. I'm just trying to get through the next 2 minutes. So at least from what I've read from biographies of guys in combat, are often instantly in combat. People pee themselves, very common, and you're kind of frozen. And then, okay, bullets are going by me. Okay, no, I got to remember now. I got training, the stuff I have to do,
right.
And then you acclimate to that. And that's, I think, what's really interesting about your work is that inverted U curve is not fixed. I can move that inverted U, so I can do incredible amounts of stress and still be a really effective team member. So just to cap that off, we've done a ton of field studies everywhere from Papua New Guinea to sports teams to soldiers. And what we see is that before a very competitive event, an increase in oxytocin, an increase in testosterone, an increase in cortisol. So my brain is getting ready to compete with an out group, but I'm also ready to cooperate with my in group. And that's a crazy neural ballet, right? That only works with training. Right? It's not like you can come in and go, oh, I'm going to beat Venus Williams in tennis. No, you got to be freaking trained to do that, right? So same thing with your work. And I think anybody's work, right? You have to train to get good. And then you have this, prior to that, you have sort of imposter syndrome where you go, what the hell am I doing here, man? I don't belong with these guys. These guys are superstars.
Well, let's talk about that, and it kind of bridges into another question I had, and the question I had focuses on duration, and kind of the long lasting versus the short term. I mean, what I understand in my very limited understand of neurology and neurotransmitters is that you have some of these chemicals that burst in. They're like the fast fuel. They come in and they also leave your system rapidly. But we all know that trust sometimes can be different. There's a lingering effect of trust, right? Or the feelings you get after a great conversation. You and I talked a couple weeks ago. I felt great after our conversation for several hours, right? What is happening with it? What is oxytocin's involvement in that long lasting trust versus that kind of spur of the moment trust, and where does that all fit in?
Great neuroscience question, Rick. Perfect. So again, because the brain's so lazy, it's sort of a start signal. So oxytocin release, hey, Rich is safe, we're cool. What happens down within the next couple seconds is that the brain releases more serotonin in the synapse. So that's kind of relaxing, inhibitory neurotransmitter, as well as more dopamine, particularly in these midbrain so-called reward regions. So it says, oh, this is the good feeling you got, right? Like, I'm relaxed, this guy's cool, we can hang out. What do we talk about? Next time we travel near each other, we're going to go have a beer and hang out, right? We're just going to have fun conversation. So how do you know that, right? Versus Nick, who I don't want to see again in my whole life. So yeah, I know he's fine, right? So so that's that sense that basically reinforces this loop that says, oh, here are my people. I am safe around these people. So because your brain's so lazy, you don't need that oxytocin spike anymore. So what's really interesting is that oxytocin is that key signal for it's stronger for strangers than for people I know. So people you serve with, your family, your friends. When I walk in the door and I see my wife, I don't need to release oxytocin because it's metabolically cheaper for me to use memory and goes, here's a lady that's only trying to murder me twice, but most of the time she's nice to me. And so I can be relaxed around her. Right?
And these are basically, are these neural networks that are getting forged, really? That
exactly
ultimately they're just super highways of information. It's like, okay, I know this person, I trust them, and and is that why when someone who's forged that with us breaks our trust, it's so disruptive? Because it's not just like the stranger who I had a good feeling about suddenly, betrays me. It's like, oh, okay, there was nothing forged there. But when there's something forged there, is that why breaking trust is so painful?
Yeah, it's like an anomaly in your environment. Again, I'm a math guy, sorry, but if I look at ranking my interaction with anybody, if you has 0, 1, 1 positive, 0 negative or neutral, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, I get a 0. I go, oh, what's going on here? But here's where the neuroscience comes in. So often, particularly when we have maybe 10 or 20 ones, but not 2,000 ones, positive interactions, we think in our brains, all right, Rich is a bad guy. I was wrong about him. So that's called the fundamental attribution error. So I'm attributing your behavior to a personality trait. What we see neurologically is often that is a person who's just fine socially having a bad day. So that's very high level of stress. So maybe your dog died that morning, or your lack of sleep or lack of food. And we see this all the time in our daily lives, in which people are just super cranky for some weird reason,
Right.
And then if you have good prefrontal cortex, you inhibit that desire to lash out at them, and you go, okay, this person's having a bad day, so let me step back, let me not do that knee-jerk behavior. It's hard. It's really hard, but I think, again, understanding that this is likely a kind of a neurologic interference effect, as opposed to you're an innately bad person. So let's just go through the data real quick. About 2% of the population are clinical psychopaths. So these people lack empathy. They use others. They can't be remediated. They get into a lot of trouble. They have disordered thoughts. We've studied them pretty intensively in prisons, and they have a dysfunction oxytocin. They just don't connect.
Yeah.
So 2% is not bad, right? 2% means you got to cut those people loose. We find about 5 to 6% of the population that around the world are people with fine oxytocin social systems that are just having a bad day. And the other, 92% are people having a good day all the time. So most of the time, most people can do that. But I think what's interesting in your work is moving that inverted U curve, where I can train myself to be more adaptive with this team. I can train myself to understand that these folks are people that I can work together with, very natural social creatures. So again, for people listening, if you took economics 101, they would say, labor provides just utility. So that's a fancy way of saying work sucks. It sucks so bad, we got to pay you to do this job. But, in your career, Rich, in my career, oh man, I get to do the coolest stuff ever. I like the title of Matt Best's book, if you read that. Thank you for my service. Like, I got the best job ever, man. I'm special forces. I'm doing the coolest stuff ever. So I feel like in my job, I think your job, the reason we put so much energy and passion into this is because we were constantly evolving. We're learning new things. And like, I found my little niche where I could be good at something.
So
with
there's
people
a couple
that can help me.
With people going to help me, and so there's a couple aspects, and I want to dive into one of those. But the first aspect is, especially in professions like mine, where it's you got a tight group of people. We're doing something that's risky, but there's some performance and competency inside of that helps build trust. In other words, I can lean on my teammate because I know he is going to do what he needs to do so that we all persevere, we all survive, and that's could be inside of very stressful events, but. If I back that up to basically SEAL training, which sucks, right? That's like it's just, there's no other way to put it. It just sucks. There is no competency inside of SEAL training that's being shown. In other words, you're sharing suffering. And I know you've talked about oxytocin spikes when there's shared suffering. And so SEAL training, regardless, there's so many examples of people who share bad moments, and that shared suffering spikes oxytocin. What's going on there?
Yeah, so shared suffering together and synchronization of behaviors is a key way to stimulate the brain to make oxytocin. So again, you're not carrying the log by yourself, you're carrying it with six other guys, right? So, all right, that's important. You're learning to carry that boat together. Again, you never do this, in combat. It's to show that when things get really stressful, right, you can still perform. So it's giving you that confidence in the people around you and confidence in yourself that you can do this thing. So again, for listeners, who are not in the military or have regular jobs, the stress is important. So I used to think, Rich, like, these companies that would have, we're going to go whitewater rafting. I'm like, what a waste of time and money. But if you think about it, that's a stressor in which you have to work together. That's a way to build those social bonds. So one application of this is, as we are transitioning slowly to people coming back to the office, first of all, different levels of anxiety. So some people are going to be more comfortable, some people are going to be less. That's normal variation. So if you're a business leader, don't freak out about that, number one. But number two, have that bonding opportunity, right? So we're the early adopters into the return to the office system. So show up. It's slightly higher risk of infection, not super high probably. So be safe, but now we're the pioneers and we get to have this bonding experience. And so creating that stress, a big client project you've got to get due, even travel. I was thinking international travel, like the people I've worked longest with, I've traveled around the world with, and you're tired and hungry. And then, man, these people still perform. And you're like, oh, well, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah. So there is a distinct difference between shared risk and shared suffering. They could be together, right? But what we're saying and what you're saying is really, it's all about the behaviors. You're doing something with other people and behaving in a way that is consistent with each other, and that's what's building that oxytocin. Whether it be I'm jumping out of a plane with a bunch of people at 20,000 feet, shared risk, or I'm freezing in the surf zone with a bunch of people, shared suffering. It's kind of that same behavior thing.
Exactly right. And so I think, we certainly hear about snowflakes and all that who want to avoid any kind of stress. It's not good. It's not good for your health. It's not good for your immune system. It's not good for your psychology. Moderate stressors that you can overcome is so valuable. So short story. So I took my daughter, probably 11 or 12 at the time, skiing for the first time, snow skiing. We're beach people, so it was kind of a new thing. And, bunny slopes. And then finally, okay, we're going to try the intermediate slope. End of the day, it's getting a little bit icy. And what happens? She goes down, she falls a couple of times, scrapes her knuckles are bleeding, and she's crying. She doesn't want to do it. I said, okay, you got to do it one more time, then we can go home. One more time. And then what happened, right? She went down, she killed it.
Right.
Now she likes skiing, right? So again, it's that, like, I can't do this thing. Oh, now I've done this thing. But look, you had a mentor, you had a coach, you had someone who was more experienced that said, no, you can do this. I'm going to stand there with you. Whole different ball game than if you're by yourself. You're like, oh, screw this, man. I'm bleeding. I should go home. But
Yeah.
when you have someone who says, no, it's okay. So I think it's the same thing I've heard about SEAL training, where somebody, once somebody said the thing that got them through BUDS was the instructor saying, we're not going to ask you to do anything that you can't do.
Right.
Oh, okay. Yeah, this is hard, but I can do it. Oh, that's a change in mindset, right? So I think if we have that kind of change in mindset, particularly when you're doing things as a team, hey, there's a team of us doing this thing. Let's group together, right? And let's get through this thing together. It might be hard,
Right.
but if it's important, if it's hard and meaningless, you should abort, in my view.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But if it's hard and meaningful, it has purpose. So I think that's really important.
Well, BUDS has both hard and meaningful and hard and meaningless, but but I guess you could draw meaning. But it actually brings up a good point out because I want to talk about those behaviors that actually the top behaviors that actually spike oxytocin. I'm gonna start with one though because it's one of the most predominant ones, certainly in the SEAL teams, and that I talk about a lot, and that's humor, and that's laughing together. The humor factor is probably one of the most predominant things I ever saw in the SEAL teams. It's certainly one of the things I miss the most is the ability to make jokes, especially in times of stress and misery. Someone cracks a joke and you all laugh and you feel better. And I know this is because laughing generates these chemicals, and one of which is oxytocin. But can you talk about why laughter is so powerful? And did you actually study laughter and oxytocin in some of your work?
I haven't studied laughter and oxytocin, but I certainly know the literature. So yeah, you get this oxytocin and dopamine response, like in movies. If you're in a movie by yourself or watching at home, you don't tend to laugh out loud or not that much. But in a group, in a theater, you're enabled to do that. So there's this kind of feedback from the group. So yeah, big stress reliever, and particular teasing, right? So if I know you well enough, right, I can begin to tease you about your weirdo looking earlobes. I'm just making this up. Your earlobes are fine, but right. So if you can start doing that, and we really know each other. Like teasing people, it has to be some truth. If you tease people you don't know, it's just mean.
Yes.
But if you know people, right? So it's a kind of humor sometimes that happens under stressful situations in which, I think that the time together and stress together are very important. So the more time I can spend with you, particularly if we're doing something, particularly for active people like us, then I get to know you more and more and more in all kinds of different situations, some stressful, some not stressful. And I think that's, really important. So humor is there. The other thing is touch, and we've talked about this, right? So one thing you see in the military is high levels of trust. I was at West Point many years ago, giving some lectures, and all these guys are poking me and grabbing me, and so we certainly have studied touch as a way to really touch, an appropriate touch, obviously.
Yeah.
And if I say, like, what the hell's going on? They say, oh, they trained us to do this. If we need to convey information, I'm going to break the space barrier and I'm going to grab you physically. So I'm getting somatic feedback. We have to do this thing now. Okay, good. You got my attention, right? I'm in, I'm on, right? This is going to go. So again, that's a kind of different story, but touching, hugging, that it's a very bonding experience. And I think some people sometimes don't realize in the military how much touch is important. Right.
Well, it can be detrimental for someone coming out of the military who jumps into a civilian role and starts breaking space and getting in people's faces, and they don't understand what that means. But it's an interesting thing you bring up. I remember my wife. When I met my wife, I was already a SEAL. She didn't know really anything about SEALs. Her only experience was the movie The Abyss, and in that movie, all the SEALs go crazy. But I remember as she started meeting my friends and meeting more SEALs, she said at one point, she said, "You guys are the most huggy people I've ever seen." Because we were always like, whenever we saw each other, we'd hug each other and all that stuff. The bro hugs and things like that. And what I realized in reading your work and seeing this is one of the key ways that you see these bonding things. Even when we see athletes slap each other on the ass or pat each other, these are all I guess cues where you're generating that oxytocin exchange, correct?
Yeah, exactly right, and it's a very effective way to do it without using words. So I don't know about you, but I'm not generally a very expressive person. But I can grab one of my friends around the neck and punch him or whatever, and then he knows I'm saying, "Look, I love you. You're one of my guys," whatever. So again, I think it's just a different way to express it. So again, obviously appropriate. So I'm kind of famous for hugging people rather than shaking hands, but I was pre-announced. Like, hey, I hug everybody. And then almost everyone goes, oh, that's great, sure.
Yeah.
And then every once in a while, someone's socially anxious or whatever, or, it's okay. I can shake hands. I'm able to do that. I just,
yeah.
So to me, that's a hack. So I'm you've got to take your own research seriously. So if I want to connect to people rapidly, if I hug them, then it's basically a hack in your brain that goes, oh, here's one of my people, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
that's
because
right.
who do you hug? People that you're close to, people that you've connected to.
Right.
And so again, you can accelerate that process if you think a little about the neuroscience.
Let's talk about, because I am an animal lover, and I'm sure there are people listening who are animal lovers. Does I'm assuming this goes both ways in animals as well. Our pets, when we hug, we touch our pet, or we pet our pets, that's an oxytocin exchange, correct?
Absolutely. So we've said it many times. I just looked at my big German Shepherd sitting
Yeah.
here next to my feet. So um, yeah, so we say that in both directions. One, we looked at people just petting random or playing with random dogs or cats, and something interesting happens. So oxytocin is released in the human irregularly with pets, but if it's your pet, for sure you release it. That's
I see.
that
Yeah.
reciprocal bonding. But what's interesting is pets may be training us. So dogs induce in humans more release than cats. But if people have had in our study 4 or more pets in their lifetime of any type, birds, snakes, dogs, then 4 is the threshold. Then you always release oxytocin when you interact with any old friendly dog,
Oh,
right?
interesting.
So,
Okay.
so think how interesting it is that we created dogs, right, which is the most common
Yeah.
pet,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So they are our best selves in some sense, right? Always loyal, happy to see you, always happy to do something. And so they may be training us. So maybe we domesticated dogs so that they would domesticate us.
Oh man, that's really interesting. So, quick thing though, I remember you saying something about oxytocin in mammals. Does it apply to snakes and reptiles and other, kind of different pets like that? I mean,
No, it doesn't really. Yeah.
okay.
So I used to have a boa constrictor, and I would say I loved this. You only had to feed it once a month. So when I traveled, it was happy. But it would give great hugs, but no, they don't have this kind of response. Fish do, but it's just a different mechanism. It's really much more basic for reproduction.
Okay.
So
All
it's
right.
really mammalian things. So where I live now, we have wild burros. It's a long story, but it used to be a mining area, and they move around. And so over time, there's a herd of them, 40, 50 of them. And my daughter and I just spent half an hour hanging out with them and slowly acclimated. They slowly came over to us. We started petting them. Now they're wild animals, but why are we scratching their heads?
Yeah.
It's normal bonding behavior, right? If you're a safe animal. And
Ah.
so, it is possible to do that. Again, you guys, be careful if you're listening. Don't be,
Don't jump into the
don't.
safari and sit with the lions without. Yeah.
Yeah, I was saying we have mountain lions where I live. So yeah, I'm always looking for that mountain. Don't want to scratch the mountain lion.
Right, right. Yeah, interesting. So, okay, so we talked about physical touch. What are some of the other like really key powerful behaviors that generate oxytocin?
Yeah, almost any synchronous activity. So one thing I thought about is like boot camp. Why are we marching in unison all the time? Is that synchrony? So same thing with dancing, singing together. Anything you do synchronously works.
Oh, okay.
If there is stress, better, right? So think of performers. You're performing, you have an audience, you have humans looking at you. You've rehearsed this thing, you know how to do it, but that's a great way to bond. So again, think of actors on a movie set or a TV show. I do kind of bonding, partially because they're allowed to kind of emote more than in normal life, I think, but also because you have an audience you've got to perform. So, I think we all have a little bit of performance anxiety, but if you can get over that and perform, it's really important. So having an audience, doing something publicly is not bad. So again, bringing back to most people's lives, being recognized at your work for being a high performer publicly, much bigger oxytocin and dopamine hit for maintaining high performance than if I just email you a thank you or a Starbucks gift card or something, right?
Yeah.
So that kind of public component. So really thinking about all the social behaviors that we do as humans, and again, putting that stress in there. So again, from a work perspective, we would call that challenge goals,
Right.
right? So,
Right.
giving people more and more goals so that they can accomplish more and have that sense of mastery. And that establishes me as part of that team. I am contributing more and more to the success of my organization.
And just to key in on one of those things in the public, in the audience factor, the audience is providing more oxytocin for those who are doing the deed, correct? Or is it actually getting exchanged in between with the audience as well? Or is it just, I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, getting exchange, exactly right.
Oh,
Right.
wow.
So
Okay.
when you do, and you do a lot of public speaking, I do, and it took me, Rich, probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 years before I had been on stage enough where you can do things that professionals talk about, actors, where you can read the audience, you can talk and have that out-of-body experience, and then kind of start absorbing that energy, right? So that's that flow. Again, supernatural, not supernatural. It's natural for social creatures like us to be able to do that, to spit into that audience. And also it's uncomfortable when the audience is not happy. So I've certainly given a couple, talks in my life where, you hear the rustling paper and you go, man, these people are not with me. This is not pleasant. But, bombing, as a comedian would say, is also a learning experience, but also means you need to pivot, right? So now we're back to, what does my group of people want me to do? Even if I'm the only one on stage, they want me to be successful. So when I spoke at TED, the nicest thing that the TED curator said to me before I went on stage was, because I was so nervous. Oh my God, super nervous. Because it's gonna, go online and dozens of people will see it or love it or hate it. He said, everyone in the audience wants you to be successful.
Yeah.
Right. So very much like the guy in SEAL training, right? So if you think of that, right, unless people are really evil, which most people aren't, the humans around you want you to be successful. So I think this, again, moves into your work, which is from a leadership perspective, a lot of this is coaching, right? I'm going to give you some skills and I want you to practice those. You're not going to be great at them at first, but I'm going to give you feedback. And that rapid feedback, if you trust the person, oxytocin, connection, okay, this man or woman wants me to be better. This is the tennis coach. This is right. So from a leader perspective, it's really not about you being so awesome and successful. It's really taking the people that you lead and helping them elevate. And when they're successful, gosh, you're a superstar.
Which is a great thing to kind of key on for leaders, because this is why honest, candorous feedback. So giving bad news, but in a way that tells someone that you care about them and you want them to succeed, will in fact induce trust versus disrupt it. Correct?
Yeah, exactly right. So that kind of radical candor. I have kids. I love my kids to death. They are accountable. When they make mistakes, they get feedback. And they get lots of praise and big cheerleader. But if I didn't care about them, I wouldn't give them feedback like, oh, whatever, fail your class, I don't give a crap. Right. So I think, that's the important thing. But you've got to establish that safety, that oxytocin-driven trust first. If I'm hired the first day and you come in and yell at me, not appropriate. Right. But if you sit there and go, so one of my pet peeve words of the many is human capital at work. I don't know who invented that, but I think it's evil. It says you're a machine, you're replaceable, you have a mechanism. Oh, you're a human being. And I think, again, for listeners, it means people are going to have good days and bad days. People are going to respond differently to different kinds of coaching. And you've got to kind of specialize to that person, but also no one's perfect, right? You are not perfect. So accept that difference. But in that difference, you also may find little pearls of wisdom. Like, oh, this guy did this thing differently. We call that an innovation if it's a positive deviation. We call it a mistake if it's a negative deviation. But if you don't have deviation, you'll never have innovation. So let's just keep innovating. And then if that didn't work, say I'm a leader, I'll go, hey, Rich, so how did that new approach? I'll go, oh, man, if we have trust, you'll say, oh, man, and that sucked. I burned 2 days, didn't work at all. Okay, let's talk about that. So as you know, where I live, Silicon Valley, is very common to have monthly congratulations, you screwed up celebrations. So let's go in and talk about the things we try to do to innovate, have pizza and beer, share the information so no one else does it, but also celebrate that we try to innovate. And as from a leadership perspective, your job, I think, is risk mitigation, right? So maybe letting you spend 2 days trying this new thing out is okay. Spending 2 years, probably not appropriate, right? There's some kind of feedback. But in the coaching world, where I'm checking in with you daily or even more than daily, how's it going? Are you reaching your goals? What do you need help with? Right? That's where that feedback loop is real tight. And from the brain perspective, it says, oh, this person cares about me and my performance. Right. Not just performance. They have to care about me. So last thing, I'm sorry, I'm on a little bit of a rant.
This is great. Yeah.
But it's building that caring relationship. So you're not a piece of human capital, you're a human being. And for the people I work with, I think we should be invested in the human, not in the performance.
Yes.
I like to do both. I like to have the human perform really well, right? But so an example is when people want to leave. So when I do I can do this forward-looking annual review with the people I work with, and the question I ask is, where do you want your next job to be? Here, elsewhere? Let's talk about that. Where are you going? Am I helping you get there?
Yeah.
right? So if it's here, awesome. If you want to go work at Google, also awesome, right? Why? I got a guy at Google now, right? So,
Yes.
if I want to do a project with Google, I can just call you up. So that's good
Right.
for me. It's good for you. But also, if you're trapped here, you're not going to perform well, right? So
No.
to have that growth, that development of mastery, mastering new skills.
Yeah. Well, one of the things you also said that I think, and I've said this before, one of the most difficult uh, aspects of leadership is giving the people in your span of care the space to fail. And oh, by the way, the same thing with parenting too.
Yeah.
We have to give our kids the space to fail, or else they'll not learn. We can't helicopter parent that. We have to let them fall off the bike to learn how to ride it. So I have to remember we have an audience because you and I can get in these these conversations. If you are watching and you have questions, just go ahead and throw them in the chat, and I'll see if I can ask Paul the questions. I did have one question come in from LinkedIn prior to talking about happiness and how happiness is related to trust and oxytocin. How is general happiness related to all of this that we're talking about?
Such a deep question. So I'm going to shamelessly plug. I have a book coming out this summer called Immersion: The Science of Extraordinary Experiences and the Source of Customer Happiness. So
Right.
I spent a lot of my career studying happiness individually, groups, and the answer is slightly complicated. So I want to, instead of taking 30 minutes to
Give
do this, I'm gonna
give
do
us
it in
give us a
90
preview, and then I'll have
seconds.
you on after the book comes out, and we'll talk about it in
Oh,
depth. So
bless you. Yeah. So basically, most of our long-term life satisfaction comes from connections to other people,
Yeah.
right? And so oxytocin facilitates that. And the short answer is, the more I connect, the more I have these amazing social experiences, the more my brain adapts to this, and the easier it is for me to have them. So, like anything you're doing that allows you to be more present, more connected, meditation, walks in nature, the more you do that, the more you want it. And we see that this builds life satisfaction. So people who are happier live longer and live healthier. And the reason for that is stronger and often more social connection. So if oxytocin is the social connection neurochemical, you can train your brain to get better at this. So, Rich, I don't know about you, but I'm a super introverted dude. I mean, I'm taking it now because I'm talking to you, but I could spend 12 hours not talk to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
But I realized from my own research, I need more social connections. So, because it'll make me happier and healthier and not make me such a weirdo. And so I turned 50 a couple years ago. I had 4 surprise birthday parties, right? Not because I'm so awesome. It's because I spent time investing in those social relationships. So I think it's a question of, how do you invest your time? And even if you're a selfish bastard and you want to live longer and healthier, you got to build some social relationships. Yeah. And how do you do that effectively? Now we're back to your world. Do an activity with your friends, particularly if it's moderately stressful, right?
Yeah,
could be taking a walk, could be hiking, could be shooting range, whatever those things are. If you can amp up skydiving, if you kind of amp up some of that adrenaline, you can actually build bonds more rapidly. By the way, it's perfect for people who are single and dating. So if you want to have the world's, first date count for 10 dates, take a helicopter ride at sunset, go skydiving or rock climbing, do something that's actually active, physical, and a little bit scary. And man, it's a great bonding experience. So
and you
trying
also
to help the kids.
Yeah, and you tease out some attributes too. So you have to see some of those hidden qualities as well, right? So the way I helped my introversion was I married an extrovert, and she's Kristen is she's always helping me get out there and meet and talk to people. All right, we got a little bit more time. I have 2 more questions that I want to ask. First is this idea that I've heard and read about how acts of kindness and generosity towards other human beings generate oxytocin, but even witnessing acts of kindness and generosity towards other human beings also create oxytocin. Is that true, and why?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah. So when we say we're social creatures, it means that neuroatomically we have so many receptors for oxytocin in our frontal cortex that we're just super sensitive to social information. So, Rich, you and I have never had this experience because we're much too macho, but I've heard that people occasionally cry at movies. Neurologically, that's interesting, right? So then the movie The Boy Gets the Girl, people cry, you're cognitively intact, in your theater, you're aware these are professional actors, it's a fictional story. So that's the witnessing, right? When you witness something beautiful. Or just something, emotionally powerful. I was in Washington 2 weeks after 9/11, the Pentagon, and it was just well, you know how it was.
Yeah.
And anyway, did a ton of work on let's say war on terror generally on the intel side for many years after 9/11. And anyway, I think the 10-year anniversary of 9/11, there was some documentary that my kids were watching. I wasn't paying attention, and I saw the planes hit the towers. I started bawling. I just lost it.
Yeah.
That's interesting, right? Neurologically, it's interesting. Like I didn't know this was so emotionally important to me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's the first thing. The second is generosity. So again, here's a hack for the listeners. If you want to connect to someone, give them something meaningfully, and it's better if you can say why. So I'm looking for a prop. If I give you these, hey, Rachel, I thought you might like some mints. It's different than, Rachel, I really value you as a friend, and you've been great. You've been a friend of mine for 20 years, and you've always been great to me. And I really know you love coffee. So here's a basket of coffee for no reason at all. So with a spouse, with a friend. So if you express the words why, then you actually add that emotional component, right? If you just give them something, it's okay. So we did I don't know if you saw this, and people can Google it. You Google my name and chocolate study. You actually see a film of a study we did for a chocolate company in Denmark, exactly with this, right? Let's give gifts. And not only does the receiver of the gift get oxytocin release, but as you said, Reg, it bounces back to the giver. So now we're in this nice loop where we're just feeling connected to each other.
And the observer, someone observing that also gets it because they see that, right? So it actually jumps to people who are actually watching that.
Right, which is
because of the emotion. Yeah, because of
the emotion.
It's funny you should say that because I just the 20th anniversary obviously came and I was watching. I sat down with my 16-year-old to watch the very well done documentary. I think it was on Netflix, and we hadn't got through the first 3 or 4 minutes, and I had to turn it off because I was too emotional. We went back and watched it later, but my son was looking at me. Of course, he kind of understood why, but you're right; those things come back to us. But here's a quick question, off topic, because it boiled up while you were talking. When I was a younger man, teenager, young 20s, I never cried at movies, wouldn't even think about crying at movies, right? Then I got married and I had kids, and I started feeling more emotional when I watched Finding Nemo. Suddenly I feel more emotion. And now as a almost 50-year-old, I'm way more emotional when I watch things. Why is that? What's happening there?
You're going to get A+ for that question, Rich. Oh my God, A+ question. So what is the anti-oxytocin? What inhibits oxytocin release? There's a couple things: high levels of stress, but also, interestingly, testosterone. So what happens to young males? They're literally testosterone poisoned, right?
Yeah.
10 times. So as you get over 30, your testosterone begins to decline. So now this balance between oxytocin and testosterone starts to stabilize. When you have children, your testosterone goes lower, which allows more bonding to them, which evolutionarily makes sense. I don't have any data for this, but in my experiences, if you have little girl children like me and you pick out dresses every day, your testosterone goes to 0. You become a big girly man. So that may only be me, right? So it's okay. As we age, we have more opportunity to connect, right? And in studies that we've done in my lab, we administer testosterone or placebo to men, so essentially creating alpha males. We find these alpha males are overconfident. They are self-interested as opposed to other interested. They take way more risk, right? So all these things are sort of classically associated with young males. So I think what's interesting about military training in general, but SEAL training in particular, is it's breaking down this all about me,
right?
And it's now all about us, right? I'm putting you in this unit, and I've got to break that down hard, because when you're a 20-year-old, 19-year-old, 18-year-old, you are just full of energy. And testosterone, by the way, is the freaking wonder drug, man. So I have this weird ethical thing that when we do drug studies, I take the drug myself so I can say to participants, we have ethics approval, and I took this drug for 2 weeks.
Right.
You got a lot of energy. So again, don't abuse. It's a scheduled drug. Don't abuse it, you guys. But it's very, very powerful in terms of your ability to really focus and not need sleep to have high energy. Yeah. And so this is the teenage boy stuff. So again, there are ways to modulate that besides being in the military, but it's sports, for example, is a great way to do that. But that focus, that ability to just do this. Rich, I have a question for you. So I actually told my kids recently, my kids never saw me cry either after the 9/11. They're like, we've never seen you cry. What's happening? What's wrong with you? I realized that, like, knowing now how hard it was for me to go through 5 years of graduate school to get a PhD, I would never do it again. I mean, emotionally hard. I wasn't sleeping. I lost weight. The whole thing was just absolutely stressful. Knowing now, looking back at your younger self, would you have still gone through SEAL training, been a SEAL?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I would go
Okay.
through. I would go through again. I would love to go through buds again, just to see what it feels like, and just to get the feelings again. I just know my body wouldn't keep up.
Right.
But it's because you find and you recognize, certainly after the fact, you recognize those moments. And I think even after 20 years in the SEAL teams and having gone combat and stuff, you actually become much more adept at finding humor and finding ways to hack into good feelings even in misery, finding the
Mm.
funny in the miserable. And so yeah, I would 100% I would do it again. And you also learn things about yourself and you create bonds. Let me ask you this, because I know we're gonna kind of land this plane here in a second, but
Yeah.
a part of the reason also why we as we get older we might be more emotional? Is it also because with experience we actually gain empathy? We gain the ability to be empathetic to others' experiences and situations. Does that make sense? I mean, I feel like I've gained empathy as I've gotten older. And is that related to trust and oxytocin and this emotional stuff?
Really good question. I wish the easy answer was yes. It's complicated. So I think part of the thing we see in younger people, teenage, is that the area in the brain that allows us to process information and make good decisions, the prefrontal cortex, is actually not fully wired up until people are around 30,
Right.
right? So that's why I think for young people, we need guides. We need opportunities to fail in a safe space. We need a chance to grow because we're still impulsive. So women mature a little faster than men neurologically, not surprisingly. So once you have this prefrontal cortex, which primarily is inhibitory for these kind of knee-jerk responses, our brain is now a little more integrated, if you will. And so now
Hmm.
I can understand others more effectively. So it doesn't seem to be a real oxytocin effect, although that kind of tolerance for weirdness. We're all weird. I mean, neurologically, behaviorally, we're all weird. So, but once you have been around enough weird people, it doesn't seem to bother you anymore, right? So really, I think it's this prefrontal cortex ability, and then just having been on the planet long enough, where you go,
Yeah.
things happen. It's okay, right? And
Right.
again, a small subset of things I need to really worry about. But gosh, how blessed are we to be on this planet? Have these great lives, walk in nature, have people that care about us. Oh my gosh, that's
Yeah.
actually amazing. And so, you can appreciate that when you're in your 50s, like we are, but when you're 18, hell no,
Yeah.
it's all about
No, we
me.
don't.
So that's okay. So people evolve, and I think we should give people the space to do that, and even facilitate it if we can.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's fantastic. All right. Well, we have gone now 47 minutes or so. We could go for a long time. We're going to do this again. So that'll be a certain. I want to just thank you for being here, and thank you for giving us all that all of your knowledge, and not all of it, certainly a taste of it. And to my audience, look up everything Paul Zak. There's a great TED talk on morality. He has a bunch of the chocolate experiment, and then of course his books, Trust Factor. And we're looking forward to your new book too. So look up Paul and his work. And Paul, I will look forward to the next time we can talk. But thanks for being on today.
Absolutely, Rich. Yeah,